Hello everyone and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today I am privileged to be joined by Reb Shmuel Botnick, a noted author and the writer of a brand new biography about Reb Nata Greenblatt. Thank you, Reb Shmuel, for being here.
Thank you.
Since you're a resident today of Cincinnati, correct?
That's
right. We appreciate you coming out to the tri-state area for this conversation. This new book about Rav Nata is getting a lot of attention. People are very excited. I know you put your heart and soul into this project and you have a lot to share about it. So we're going to talk about this book about a very, very unique person. When we were schmoozing before this interview, you're talking about how Rav Nata was really unlike anyone, both in the rabbinic sphere, both in the world of Askanas, in everything that he did and represented. Reb Nata was very unique. But just for a moment, before we get into it, some people may know your name from Mishpacha magazine. You're a prominent writer there. Talk about yourself. Just tell us who you are and how you got to this stage in life as a writer of such a biography.
Right. Yeah, my story is not nearly as interesting as Reb Nata's. So I grew up in Toronto. Lived there until I got married, basically. If you want to know my whole educational background, so I went
Where did you learn?
So I learned elementary school is in Toronto, and then there's a yeshiva there, Rabbi Kaplan's yeshiva.
Sure.
Then I went to Novominsk for Beis Medrash, Shalom Shachter after that, BMG, then I got married, went to ArtScroll for a bit, and then I moved to Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going out on a limb to say that writing today is a lost art. And someone to be a writer of your caliber is rare. I mean, it's just a fact. So where did someone like you get that skill?
Yeah.
Is that something you always aspired to do?
I always wrote. I can't say I aspired to be a writer on a professional level, but I always wrote to the point I remember my second grade teacher calling me to the side. She gave me a notebook. She said, I want you to fill this up with stories. Every day write a story, bring it to me, and I'll mark it. I always wrote. Originally, my main writing was like poems and song. I remember I used to write like a little poem about everyone and anyone in my class. To this day, people remember them. Journeys was a very big impact. Very, very big. It was very much part of my life.
You're saying as from a musical standpoint? Or
Not the musical.
From the lyrical standpoint?
I would study the lyrics, like be my ayin in them like a sugya.
I mean, you grew up in Toronto. Do you ever get to speak to AB?
Yeah, not so much. We don't live near each other. So that was really the whole first part of my writing. It wasn't so much writing in a conventional sense. It was a lot of, in camp, I was always a big songwriter. I didn't get into real writing till later. I wrote one article for Mishpacha that they liked a lot. And
how many years ago are we talking?
A while ago, so it's probably 7 years ago.
Oh, it's not so long ago, actually.
Yeah, so it was actually under very tragic circumstances. What happened was I had a very close friend who lost a child, like a crib death. So, it's very emotional, and I had no way to express it, right? So I guess the natural writer in me was just I wrote it up. And the article is called Solace of Silence, like the way you could give nechama by basically not saying anything. And that I submitted that, and that was published. That was the first thing that was ever published. And that's when I started getting into it. Interestingly, I moved to Cincinnati, and Punkt, one of the big editors from Mishpacha, lives in Cincinnati. And she's like a neighbor of mine, which that's real Ashkacha Pratis. And so she already knew my name from that article. She started sending me other work, and that's when I really got into writing, ultimately to join the editing team.
Did you have anyone who was coaching you or teaching you along the way, or did you kind of formulate your own style?
Right. So in terms of, you asked me about the skill, it comes very naturally. My father is an incredible writer. His father was an incredible writer. All my siblings are writers. So I don't take too much credit for just having a knack for it. In terms of style, I would credit Surly Besser almost entirely, because Surly really branded he branded something that never really existed before. I don't think people will realize that he's really a pioneer in terms of he created a level of professional writing that has a yeshivish tone to it. Right? There was we always had very professional writers, right? But if you go through, let's say, I've never done it, but go through every single Jewish Observer article, you'll never find the word like grata in it. Right? It's just, that wasn't considered professional. But it's really created a mahalach where you could still write on very, very high caliber,
but infuse it with like yeshiva.
Infuse it in a language that really expresses our culture. And that very much spoke to me. And honestly, I don't think I would be inspired to be a writer if I couldn't do that, because that's my background. And I want to be able to express myself in my language. I don't speak English, I speak yeshivish. You know, that's if I can't write yeshivish, I wouldn't want to write. Right. Because it would be entirely academic, it would be highly sophisticated.
Speaking of academic, if I could reveal this, from what I understand, you dabbled in a law career for a short period of time.
Yeah.
You are an accredited attorney.
I'm licensed
right? You're
attorney
licensed
in
attorney
Ohio, yeah.
In Ohio, you took the bar.
Took the bar, passed the bar, practiced for 2 years, and then bounced.
You left your law career behind.
Yeah,
and now you're writing books for ArtScroll.
Yeah,
so.
I never looked back. No, you are correct, and I'll tell you, the law career had nothing to do with writing at all, because I only practiced transactional. I did corporate real estate, corporate healthcare, or commercial real estate, I should say, corporate healthcare. There's no writing at all. It's all super formulaic contracts and purchase agreements that are all pre-drafted. You just put in new numbers, basically. So there's very little writing skill. Law school had a lot of writing in it, and I made sure only to take the classes that were writing related, as opposed to, let's say, like bankruptcy law and things like that. I never got less than an A- on any paper I wrote, which really, that is very much academic writing. So I guess I still have the skill for it, but it was not fun to write. I would never pursue a career in writing that kind of stuff. It's boring. And again, it's not expressive of who I am. And writing is really all about expression. You can't write something you don't feel. So if you're not feeling it, then there's no enjoyment, there's no stimulation in writing it.
But tell me if I'm correct, writing a biography like this one on Reb Nata is really a totally different endeavor than just your creative writing where you're enjoying the writing. It involves tremendous amount of research. I would imagine you probably interviewed, 100 people for this book?
Sure.
Over 100?
I didn't count. It's definitely in the 100 range.
Yeah. Just to get the material.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The interviewing was geschmack. I
enjoyed that, traveling around?
No, I didn't travel around. It was all Zoom,
remotely?
almost all Zoom. The only time I traveled was I went to Memphis. And that wasn't solely for the purpose of interviewing. I wanted to just kind of feel out Reb Nata in his natural environment.
Did you ever meet Reb Nata during his lifetime?
Never. I still feel like I know him better than anyone else, but I never met him b'chayev, no.
Now, a lot of people know the name Reb Nata. They know there was this Rav in Memphis who was totally out of the box, but was a world-class Talmid Chacham who knew everything. He was very famous for many different things, prominently helping people, whatever it was that people needed. What was your first introduction to Reb Nata? How did you get into this project?
Right. So again, there's so much hashgacha, but one of Reb Nata's grandchildren actually lived in Cincinnati for Tekufa. They don't live there anymore. There's a granddaughter, and she was married to a guy, she is married to a guy, Binyamin Teitelbaum, and he was a friend of mine. So he used to tell me a little bit about his wife's grandfather and how unique he is, and that's really all I knew, which really wasn't much more than what most people knew about him. But when he was nifter, I knew enough to email Mishpach and say, we have to cover this. Like he was a special person, we have to cover it. That's really the extent of what I knew. So they gave me the assignment. Now, he was nifter on a Friday, the Levaya was on a Sunday, and my primary source. I didn't have time to do research because
I had to come out for that week.
Yeah, Mishpacha comes out. We go to print on Monday, and the Levaya was on a Sunday, and so there's no time for research, no time to call people, no time to interview anyone. So I listened to the Levaya, to the Hespedim, and I wrote up an article basically based off that. I did call one Talmud of his, but that was it. So I wrote, it was like a 2-page spread. That's probably like 1,300 words.
Mm-hmm.
And we sent that off. Now, I don't know why. I shouldn't put it into my head that I should tell them. I told Mishpacha, like, it's not right. We didn't do him justice. I feel like there's so much more. So why don't we write at the bottom of the article that, there's really so much to say, and Mir for the Shleishim will come out.
A lengthier tribute.
A lengthier tribute. And that's what we did. So the article came out and didn't pick up much traction because it wasn't very comprehensive. And after the article came out, I emailed Mrs. Friedman, head of Mishpacha,
Shana
Friedman,
editor,
managing editor,
right.
And I said, we wrote that it's going to come out Shleishim. I'm just reminding you, like, find someone to write the article. And she says, like, you should do it. Maschel b'mitzvah. So I was really taken aback because at the time, this is going back a year and a half, I had not written a lot for them. I think I had written only 2 articles, and certainly not about an Adam Gadol. So it's a big responsibility. And to her credit, she trusted me. And if you want to know real Siyata D'Shmaya, this is crazy. So you mentioned I had this law career. I didn't enjoy it much at all. And eventually we decided to part ways. I was working at a very big law firm, a very big Midwestern law firm. And so basically I made a deal with them. So Renata was after the end of April. So I made a deal. I'm going to leave. I'm out. Like I can't take this anymore. But they said they'll pay me through the month of May. Okay, so and I got another job in working in-house corporate healthcare, and the starting date was June 1st. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I had this month, May,
where you were getting paid,
fully paid, no work. Mm-hmm. That was the month between his Petira and his Shleishim.
Wow.
So I worked on that article all day. I never had such an opportunity, never before, never after, where I had nothing else to do, no daigas on my head because I was being paid. I had another job, and that was the Shleishim. That was the month. So I worked like crazy on that. I never worked so hard on an article before.
Meaning calling people, getting information.
I got tons of information. Every night I was on the phone with people. There was one Talmud primarily who had documented all of Rav Nata's personal details, his background. And the article was very good. It was called The Humblest Mountain. It came out right around Shavuos time. So obviously, referring to Har Sinai. And it's the best name for an article about Rav Nata, and we could talk about that. The Humblest Mountain is exactly who Rav Nata was. And it was great. And Baruch Hashem had very good feedback, and the Greenblatts called me, I'd say in August, that they wanted me to write the book.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how I got to it.
So here you go, you get the job.
Yeah.
You've never written a biography before,
Yeah.
but you're a talented writer, so where do you start? Well, what did you do?
I started by panicking. I had no idea what to do. I would say it took me like 2 to 3 months just getting my bearings. It's funny. I laugh like looking back at my original notes. I was silly enough. I sent a list of 10 questions to someone please answer, these 10 questions about or not. Then there were these 2-word answers. It's ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. So really the main challenge was finding who Rav Nata had interactions with, because Rav Nata didn't have a yeshiva. He wasn't the Rav of a shul. He was a one-man show who traveled all across the world, helping people in all kinds of ways. So, and I say all across the world, I mean all across the world. Russia, Mexico, Eretz Yisrael. Every town, every little darful in America. Moncton, I don't even know what province, but in Canada, somewhere northern Canada. So how do you find these people? So it was like Sherlock Holmes. You call one guy and he tells you that his cousin's uncle maybe knew Rav Nata, so you get the cousin's number, get the uncle's number, and then a lot of them are wild goose chases that lead to nothing, and then you hit the jackpot. And these jackpots were incredible. You get just the most incredible stories.
You're saying people in the most random of places.
Most random places. the most incredible stories.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the real challenge, was just digging people up.
Now, the people who didn't know Reb Nata very well, they knew that the externals were unique. He was a man who, he wore a straw hat and a brown suit, came from Memphis, but was also big enough of a Talmud Chacham that his word was respected by the greatest of Gedolim and Paiskim. And he was called on for the thorniest of halachic issues, Gittin specifically. So now you're starting to write the book, and what's the picture that's being painted for you?
So I knew he was a big Talmud Chacham going into it. I had no idea to what degree. So just to give you an inkling, I had no idea that he had a relationship with the Brisker of, to the point where he said, I discussed all of Nashim and Ezekiel with him. That's different level stuff. That's not just like Talmud of Moshe who had a mahalach of Psak Halacha. He's a lamdin, clearly a lamdin of the highest level. I didn't know that he had several interactions with the Ritzer Zalman, that he had gone to visit the Chazon Ish and spoken learning with all these kinds of things. Brought to light a level of godless and Torah that I really had no idea, and I don't think anyone knows. And I think that's one of the things that the book will bring out, is how, aside from all the unconventional stuff, he had a very conventional track of an Adam Gadol of the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also part of the story of the unconventional side, because it's easy to be unconventional if you have nothing else going for you. Right. Here he had every reason to be conventional. Like he was a Talmud of Reb Aaron, to agree. People don't know that, but he used to go to Reb Aaron, not in a formal sense. He wasn't in White Plains at the time.
Right.
But he used to go to Reb Aaron's house, I guess in Borough Park where Aaron lived, and he heard shiurim, I think in Yerushalmi Demai or something like that.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. So he was Talmud of Reb Moshe primarily, but before Reb Moshe, really Reb David Leibowitz. Reb David Leibowitz was more like his Rebbe in Hashkafa. Reb David Leibowitz was a Slobodka Talmud, and Rav Nata took on that mahalach very much in terms of godless Adam. You mentioned the way he dresses. It's true, it wasn't conventional, but actually he was impeccable. If you'll see, he was always very neat. Like he never walked outside his house without a hat, and that was part of the Slobodka thing, and that came from David Leibowitz. So that's Hashkafa. And then so one of his Rebbeim, his big Rebbeim, was Rav Michal Feinstein, who was half a Rebbe, half a Charusa. Rav Michal was, I think, 35 Be'erech when he escaped. He was part of the Mir. Rav Moshe sponsored him to come to America, so he didn't go through Shanghai. I think he left Kobe, Japan. He came to New York, and Rav Nata met him, and they mamish hit it off. Rav Nata was 16. Rav Michal was the Arisha Bachabura in the Mir, 35, and they became like best friends.
Wow. Was that his connection to the Brisker Rav? Rav Michal was the Brisker Rav's Eidim.
So kind of. Rav Michal introduced him to the Brisker Rav. But the Brisker Rav was friends with Rav Nata's father. Rav Nata's father grew up in Brisk. Mm-hmm. So right away the name Greenblatt meant something to him. Right. So he became that. Yeah, but Rav Michal definitely introduced him to Brisker Rav. Yeah, and he used to go to the Brisker Rav shiurim. He used to daven by the Brisker Rav in that minyan, in his house. Anyways, yeah. So that was something I had to learn about him. Is how great of a Talmud Chacham he was. And then, like again, I mentioned my original notes. I remember I found written. I called a guy, a Chabad Shliach. The Chabad Shluchim had a lot to do with him because they were the only from Yidden, like way out in the middle of nowhere. And I wrote up a story that I thought was astonishing. He says, I needed a get, and Rav Nata came, and he didn't charge anything, and he wrote the get, and then he paid the Eidim, and he left. And I was like, I wrote that story up, like that's incredible. Looking back, that's a joke. That's like saying Rav Nata's shoelace wasn't tied, and he tied it. Like that, Rav Nata did that. That was his bread and butter. The stories start way after that. So the degree of his selflessness and the degree of his sacrifice was something that took me a while to chop. Like I didn't even know what stories I was looking for. Mm-hmm. Once a few months into the book, I was rejecting half the stories I got because they weren't even stories.
Because they were so run of the mill.
Yeah, people thought they were stories, and nobody really knew what he was doing for the rest of it. Everyone told me I thought I was his best friend. People told me they thought they were his best friend until they came to the Levaya and realized that everyone felt that way. So
I think you brought up a great point, by the way, just to reiterate it. I mean, you brought it up beautifully, but it's so easy to be unconventional when you don't have anything else going for you, which is what you said. But when you're a world-class Talmid Chacham, who, like you said, is learning your Shalmi D'mai with Rabbi Aaron Kotler, is talking to Brisker Rav and learning, someone who could hold his own with the greatest of the great, but then to be unconventional and kind of do your own thing, is what made Reb Nata so unique. That combination.
Right. I'll tell you. So one of the things I struggled with, I very much wanted this book to be inspirational, right? And one of the reasons for that is Reb Nata was such a hidden person that it didn't even feel right revealing his story, because here he spends his whole life concealing himself. What right do I have to violate that? So the only heter was because I felt Klal Yisrael has to know this story. They have to know that there was someone like this, and take on maybe a degree of his hanhaga. But one of the questions I asked myself is why I should emphasize so much his brilliance. He was an Eloi. Like, his level of intellect was beyond. His memory was almost photographic, and I talk about that in the book. And I had to ask myself why, because you can't be inspired by that.
Right.
So the answer is like this: that if you're not brilliant, right? If you don't have anything else going for you, so then you choose your thing. He decided to fly around and getting people gittin because that's what he was good at. I had to demonstrate that he was good at anything else. He could have chosen to be anything else, and yet he
chose to do this.
Right, and that's inspirational, right? That talks to anyone else who has other talents and other skill sets, that they too should maybe step out of their comfort zone and sacrifice for the sake of Klal Yisrael. So I think that's really the reason why I spent time emphasizing that.
Now, you alluded to stories. Tell me some of the revelations that you had as you're going through your research and you're hearing these mind-boggling stories. Because you're saying for Reb Nata to fly cross country to get someone to get was kind of that's what he did.
Yeah,
that's not even surprising. But there was more. I know there's more.
Yeah, there's a lot more. You want to know his craziest stories? They're very crazy stories. He found out that there's a guy who left his wife without giving her a get, and he's somewhere in Vegas working at a kitchen in a casino. It's not where a nice Jewish boy wants to hang out. So he picks up, flies to Vegas, goes to every single casino, and asks them, "Is there a new cook in town?" And they say, "No. Finally, yes. What time does the shift start?" 5 a.m. So he comes at 5 a.m. He shows up in the kitchen to a very surprised cook, and he says, "You have to write your wife a get." And he did. The way it worked, I became a big buck in Hilchos Gittin, by the way. So it's called a shtar minoy. It's a minoy. You appoint the person to write the get, and that's what he did. He carried around the shtar minoy, and he had them sign it, and then he went and wrote the get. So that's just one. I'll tell you, he said, he went to the casino at night and came back the next morning. He said, "I saw the chaver playing cards, and at night it was the same chaver playing at 5 a.m. He said, "If I had such a smada, I'd be Rav Kiveger." So that's one. If you want to know more, I think this is also Vegas. And you have to also realize that he didn't charge for this. He just... And it wasn't like he was intimately involved in these stories. He just got a phone call. There's a guy, apparently he's in Vegas. He's okay, he was out the door. Mamish out the door. They didn't even have a chance to say how much does this cost. He didn't ask questions. So I went to his house. He has drawers jammed with, he kept everything, every single plane ticket.
Everything documented?
Every plane ticket, every car rental. If you count up the dollars and cents, it might hit $1 million.
$1 million that he spent out of his own pocket?
Sometimes they paid him back. I don't think he asked for it. I'm sure in many cases they never paid him back. Even if for his flight, his car rentals, his hotel stays, he kept every single gas receipt.
What was the reason for that?
I have no idea. He just kept everything. These are his tickets to El
Right, I was going to say, his tickets to Gan Eden. Wow.
Okay, but that's one. I could give you so many. They're not all gittin. It's just anything for the sake of Kedushas Yisrael. That's really the more general thing. Gittin, obviously, because to prevent mamzeres, but it's really anything that had to do with the continuity of Torah in Klal Yisrael.
Right.
And if you want to know their story, so we could speak about this. Rav Nata really dedicated his heart and soul into building a Jewish day school in Memphis.
Right.
Talk about sacrifice. He knew that in order to convince people to send them to a Jewish day school, he would have to counter the very enticing offer of public schools, which is that it's free.
Right.
So he said it's free. This Hebrew school will be free. Now, what did that mean?
That means he had to fundraise.
Well,
To
first of
cover
all,
the
he
school.
taught Aleph Beis to kindergarten and first grade. He started the school in 1949, September 1949, with a kindergarten and a first grade. He taught them Aleph Beis.
Which is also astounding, that he's teaching kids Aleph Beis. You're talking about a world-class Talmid Chacham.
A year before he was talking Nashon is equal to
Nashim
Bris
is equal to
Karav,
Bris Karav, and he's teaching Aleph Beis in Memphis.
teaching Aleph Beis in Memphis. Just to tell you a cute story, one of those Talmidim it was Rav Nachum Lansky, who's now a Maggid Shir in Baltimore, Narisal, Baltimore, also a world-class Talmid Chacham. So there was one year he wrote a shtickle Torah about the Vilna Gaon's Pirush on the Aleph Beis. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's obviously way beyond most people's pay grade. And Rav Nata saw it. The next time he met Rav Nachum, he says, "I already taught you the Aleph Beis." Anyways, he got a call from Torah Musora. They were very impressed with what he did in Memphis. And they said, "There's another city. I don't need to mention which city it was, in the south." Who, they also need a Hebrew day school. Maybe you can do it. So Nata flew over there, and he went to the rabbi, and he said, I want to start a Hebrew day school. And the rabbi laughed him off. He said, the people here want nothing to do with the old style. They want to send their kids to public school and get degrees and become successful, in a secular way. So Rav Nata said, but I really want to do this. He said, find me 10 names. If you could get 10 people to sign on that they want to send their kid to a Hebrew day school, we'll do it. So Rav Nata went knocking on doors in a city that he had nothing to do with. He didn't trust the kashrus anywhere, so he only ate fruit for a week. And it was in the heat of the summer. He ate fruit and he drank water. That was it. And he finally got 10 names. So he shows up to the rabbi, and he says, I have the 10. So the rabbi turns like pale. I'm not sure what the major opposition was to a Hebrew day school. The way I understand it was that these communities had a Talmud Torah that was affiliated with the school, and therefore they made money. It was affiliated with the shul. That way the shul made money. You open a school, the Talmud Torah, fizzles out, and I think that's where it comes from. So the rabbi turns pale, and he takes the list, and he starts looking, and he sees one name at the end. And he says, this one doesn't count. They live on the other side of the tracks, which I think that means literally and also like figuratively. Other side tracks means they're like chutz l'machna. They have nothing to do. It doesn't count. You have 9, you don't have 10. Deal's off. Renata came home like ice mensch, and I think his wife said, I'm putting this in the Aron, this list. Now, an amazing postscript to the story, many years later, when Bill Clinton was elected president, so Renata was looking at the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times, I don't remember exactly which paper, and he saw a list of the administration members, and he saw a name that looked familiar. He says, I know this name from somewhere. And it hits him that this is the name of that kid from the other side of the tracks.
Oh, wow.
So the way I heard the story was he got this guy's phone number. And he told him, I want you to know, you almost went to Hebrew day school. And Rav Nata used to cry when he said the story. He said if he had such potential, he became a member of the administration, Vasar Goin, he could have become. Now I'll tell you, I know the guy's name. I spent 2 hours trying to track him down. And I found him. So he wasn't mamash a member of the administration, because if you Google Bill Clinton administration, you get all the names. His name wasn't there. I found him. And I found he even wrote an article about how he grew up he mentions the town. He grew up right outside the town. So it was mamish that story, the other side of the tracks. I was so tempted to call him and ask him if he remembers that phone call from there. I couldn't get myself to do it. But it was cool to see that like the story actually happened. Like the guy was part of Bill Clinton's administration. He literally grew up right outside. So he asked a crazy story. I think that's a pretty crazy story.
Yeah. So his dedication to a different community.
Anything that had to do with Kedushas Yisrael anywhere. I mean, just the amount he cared. He was once writing. Most of the Guinea wrote were not from people. From people, Baruch Hashem, most marriages last and they're beautiful, but if it has to end, so they know what to do. Rav Nata traveled around the world primarily when they weren't from, and he just begged them to give a get because he couldn't bear that somebody should go on to get married and without it. And they didn't want it. They didn't know what it was all about. He wants, in the rare case that the woman refused to receive a get, she wasn't from. She told him the only time she'll receive a get is at Denny's at 5 o'clock in the morning. So this was in New York. So Rav Nata walked into Shar Yashav. He went over to a bacher by the name of Yisrael Gruman, and he said, "You're going to come with me tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the morning. I need to aid them on the Mesiras Haget." He got him and one of the Kutner boys. Kutners are a family from Memphis. 5 o'clock in the morning, they walk into Denny's. And he's not getting paid for this.
Right.
They don't want it. But he just couldn't tolerate any violation of Kedushas Yisrael.
That's unbelievable. Now, I know there's an interesting story with regard to Reb Nata's Parnasa, because here Reb Nata was flying around. He wasn't an official pulpit rabbi, so he wasn't getting a salary for that. Tell me that story, because I know it's a fascinating one.
Let me back up a little bit, talk about his Parnasa. So he came to Memphis primarily to be a Talmud Torah teacher and a chazan. He had a beautiful voice. And when he opened...
And that was a paid position?
That was paid. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much money you make. But that was his Parnasa. And when he opened the Hebrew Day School, I told you the Talmud Torahs didn't like Hebrew Day School, the competition. So he was competing against himself, right? Because his job was to work at the Talmud Torah. He opened the Hebrew Day School, which he refused to take money from. So he's competing against himself. Now, surprisingly, he continued to teach in the Talmud Torah. They let him. So someone once asked him, "Did you do that for Parnasa?" So he says, "Was Parnasa?" The Hebrew Day School only had a kindergarten and a first grade. What are the sixth graders going to do? What are the seventh graders going to do? I need to continue teaching them at the time. So that's an amazing thing. Now, the story you mentioned, I hope I get all the details right, and it happened a long time ago. The way I heard it was there was a Yid in Memphis by the name of Meir Kivelevitz, Reb Meir Kivelevitz. He was European, and he landed in Memphis, I don't know why, and he needed to make Parnasa. So the job they gave him was to go around collecting for the mikveh, and he'd get a commission. So he ran around from house to house. Many of them were not from, didn't know what mikveh was, didn't care much. He wasn't doing very well. He knocked on the Greenblatt's door, and Rav Nata says, Mr. Kivelevitz, he brings him in, he calls his wife over. His wife, by the way, was very much part of everything, and she had her cakes and stuff that she always gave guests. And they gave him a very warm welcome, and it really changed this Meir Kivelevitz's his life and his perspective. Like all of a sudden, he feels welcome. So the way I heard it was, I don't know if he thought it to himself or he said it openly. Like, if I start doing well, you have half of what I make. I think it was.
He told that to Reb Nata.
Either he told it or he thought to himself. He probably told them. And Lamaisa, he started moving on in life, and he started getting involved in various investments. And true to his word, Rav Nata got. I think the deal was that Rav Nata got the half for free, and then until he makes enough money to buy it out. I think that's the way I heard it. And it's mamish like malachta nasasei de'echerem. He had parnasa through that.
And all because he greeted someone he didn't know.
Yeah.
He and his Rebbitzin. You see the dividends.
Yeah.
Wow.
It wasn't his only source of income. He also worked for the OU a lot. He was a tremendous bucky in kashrus.
Mm-hmm.
But just talk about his parnassus. Something someone told me was, Rav Nata had an impeccable memory. Remembered everything. He could tell you on November 2nd, 1962, I was walking down the street at Ocean Parkway. I was holding a yellow bag in my left hand, every single detail. So he was once talking about how he was doing a job for the OU back in like the 50s or something. And someone said, "Did you do that for parnassa?" And he's thinking, I don't remember. He didn't care about himself. This is the one yesod of Rav Nata, is he himself, Nata Greenblatt, was a non-factor in any consideration. He cared about Hashem, he cared about Torah, he cared about Klal Yisrael. There was no such thing as I'm too tired, I'm too hungry. It just didn't exist. He was a non-factor in his life. So like someone like that, to not remember what you did, I mean, for me, if like in 50 years ago, the only thing I'm going to remember is what I did for a living, but it's just amazing. That's one of the amazing things.
We were schmoozing a couple of weeks ago about the book and what we're going to do to get people to know about the book. And you made an interesting comment to me. We were talking about what the book should be called.
Yeah.
In the end, we called the book Reb Nata.
Yeah.
But you made a comment that really, if you had your druthers, the right name for this book is All for the Boss.
Yeah.
It just so happens to be.
I'll get sued by the Shane family.
That there's another book by that name, a classic. But the point that you were bringing out is this exact point, that everything he did was for the boss. Everything he did was for the Rebbeinu Shalom. There was no personal agenda at any stage. V'harayu, you look the way his life played out. He never promoted himself. Outside of his circle of what he was doing, many people didn't hear of him, and he was comfortable with that. He liked it that way.
100%. And there's so many stories that demonstrate that. I mean, just think about it, right? So he was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, moves to Memphis. Most of Memphis, even if they were from, they didn't understand who he was, and he never cared. He was like completely, or people called him Nathan. He was Nathan. Mm-hmm. And someone told me that there's a Yid, Barish Kippur, lives in Baltimore now. We grew up in Memphis. Said his father, I guess, was maybe to a degree a Ben Torah. He used to take his friends to past the green at 2:00 a.m. He says, "I want to show you something. There's a light that's always on. That's not the green. That's what it means to learn Torah."
Wow. And
nobody knew, and he didn't care. He just didn't care that he didn't get any recognition for what he did.
Really, in essence, and when we went to Rabbi Sherman before, I think he kind of brought this out, that there was a Yid, Nata Greenblatt, who, as much as we knew about him, he was really a mystery. And what you accomplished in writing this book is bringing the mystery and the majesty of Reb Nata that existed in Memphis really to the whole world, for people to learn about, which is part of what makes this is a very unique biography, maybe unlike any other biography that ArtScroll has ever published. I know that's a strong statement, but it is really unique. Interestingly, when I was trying to think of a parallel, I was thinking of Reb David Feinstein, because Reb David Feinstein, in his own way, was really a Chad Bedara. Reb David was totally unique. And it's probably not a coincidence that Reb David and Reb Nata were good friends.
Yeah, they were good friends. That's right.
Yeah. Did you see that parallel? Were there other parallels?
I mean, Reb Nata had it's not nice to say this, there was a little, like element of like outrageous. Like he did things that were just complete. I can't see Reb David going into a casino kitchen. It's just not the. He maybe he wasn't conventional, but he was definitely a quieter personality. Mm-hmm. Reb Nata was dynamic.
Right,
he was hilarious. He had a sense of humor. So much so, I was tempted to have a chapter dedicated to his sense of humor. I felt it wasn't a chavaydai, so I incorporated the stories into other chapters. But I very much wanted to bring that out. There's many videos of Renata. People had this thing when they were by Renata, they just had to video him. They chapped that there's something historic about him. So I have all the videos. I watched them 1,000 times. It's not you could laugh to tears from some of the things he said and did. So that would be a difference. Personality.
Did he mean to be humorous, or was it just that?
He had a sense of humor.
Yeah,
he really had a sense of humor. He saw the humor in life.
But it is true. A lot of the videos also, that I've seen of Reb Nata are younger B'nai Torah,
Yeah, they
like
ran
eating,
after him. Yeah.
eating out of his hand.
Yeah, like
Eating out of his hand. You know, whether it's him checking Daled Minim and, you know.
people, he walk into a chasana, people just like pounced on him. I have a
Mhm.
picture of him. He's at a wedding and there's like 16 people around. All younger B'nai Torah.
Right.
He was a fountain of story. He had so many stories, and yet he had this incredible memory. So anything that ever happened to him, and he was Meshamish Gedalim, Reb David Leibowitz and Reb Moshe Feinstein and Reb Michael Feinstein and Reb Yashav Soloveitchik, which I forgot to mention.
Mm-hmm.
He had so many stories with Reb Yashav Soloveitchik, and then the Brisker Rav and the Brisker Zalman and the Imri Emes. He took walks with the Imri Emes of Ger, and he remembered every single story. So like you can't, and it's all like interlaced with Torah and humor, and it's just, and his own personal stories with Gittin and.
And a lot of the videos, by the way, of him speaking also, Reb Nata was a master orator.
Yeah.
And he had a certain diction, a certain way of talking that like drew you in. You were captivated.
That honestly is something I couldn't bring out in a book.
Right.
You have to have seen it in person. But
I do think people are going to read the book, are going to start hunting down
they're going to hunt
these
down
clips,
videos,
because once
100%.
you get that peek into who this unique personality was, you want more.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway of this book? People are going to read it. I think they'll be entertained. Firstly, by your writing, you did an incredible job. Just the way you paint the picture. Kanai Nahar Rebbeinu Shalom gave you a tremendous gift, and you should continue to use it.
Amen.
For lange gesunte Jahren. Beyond that, they'll be inspired by Reb Nata's scholarship, by his asmada. You mentioned him learning 2 o'clock in the morning. This is something he did regularly without any fanfare, because he was in Memphis. It wasn't like anyone knew about it or spoke about it until after.
Can I just tell you a story about 2
Yeah.
o'clock in the morning? This is in the book. There was a woman in Memphis who didn't know Rav Nata, didn't grow up anywhere near Rav Nata. She had a baby, and the baby got very sick very shortly after. He didn't even have a bris. Like, it was a baby boy. It was maybe 2 days later. He got very sick. He brought him to the hospital, and he was nifter. The baby passed away. So in those days, they just like sent you home. Like, just they told the parents, like, go home. And she was obviously completely overwhelmed. So she called a yid by the name of Hillel Belsky. I think he was just nifter, lived in Eretz Yisrael, but at the time he lived in Memphis. And he said, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. He says, call Rav Nata. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Rav Nata's up. Call Rav Nata. She calls Rav Nata. He picks up right away. She tells him what happened. He's like, don't worry about it. It's fine. He goes to the hospital, gets the kid, gives him a bris. That's the halacha. Rav Nata was a master mile. He was a master at everything. And he gave the baby a name. That's also the halacha. He spoke to her first about what name to give. He drove to the Beis HaKvaros, buried it, came back to the family, and ever since then he always would go visit the family. They lived nowhere near him. I'm just giving a note. The 2 o'clock in the morning is a very real thing. Like, you knew you could call Rav Nata at any time and he would be there. And again, he didn't know this woman. She wasn't. He didn't have a shul. He wasn't the Rav of a shul, but he did fear zach like a Rav for certain people. He would answer their shouts. Here he didn't even know her, and yeah.
So maybe that's. I asked you what the takeaway, and you told me the story. Maybe that is the takeaway. The average person watching our conversation may not have the level of Torah scholarship, the brilliance, the charisma, the photographic memory. These are matanos that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave him, but it's what he did with them. That he literally lived for the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he lived for other people in such an extraordinary way, and especially in our world where, you'll forgive me, but nowadays it almost doesn't count if it wasn't documented, in writing or by video or got some kind of level of exposure. And Reb Nata's life was lived totally, in that sense, it was lived totally under the radar, because he really didn't get a lot of exposure b'chayav, for his greatness in Torah and Chesed. This book is going to do that. Maybe that's what we could all take away from Reb Nata, is learning how to live for others.
So it's more, it's deeper than that, because it's learning how to live without yourself. In other words, it's not necessarily for others. It's for Hashem. It's for Torah. It's for anything. The way I write this, I think at the beginning of the book, is the takeaway of the book is so that you should be able to ask yourself, what would Rav Nata do? Because we can't do that. It's impossible. We're not on that level where we could just completely step back and look at something entirely objective. But when you get to know Rav Nata, just go through the motions. Whatever he would have done, that's going to be the right thing to do. And I think over this past year and a half when writing the book, that's what I developed. Rav Nata became my Rebbe, in a sense. And when you don't know what to do, you just ask what would Rav Nata do. And that's usually going to be the right answer. I think that's the takeaway, learning how to step back and live completely for the sake of the Rebbeinu Shalom.
Well, on that note, Reb Shmuel, Mazel Tov on this accomplishment. I was going to ask you if you're going to write another biography. I've heard from people who have worked on these projects that, after they finish such an undertaking, they're like, okay, I'm never writing a biography again. I hope that's not the case with you. I hope you'll do it again.
I'm still not writing another biography on Rav Nata. Even though you for sure can. Like, after this book comes out, people are going to be calling me from all over the world with
more
stories.
stories.
How am I supposed to find them? Like, I told you, it's very hard to track people down.
You'll have to print an addendum. But Mitzvah Hashem, we'll see more from you as far as the writing is concerned. And I can't wait to hear the feedback from the public to this book, because I think they'll be deeply inspired and deeply moved both by Reb Nata's Avodas Hashem and his devotion to other people. So thank you for bringing that story to light, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.